Mr. President, I ask consent for up to 15 minutes before the vote, to be followed by Senator Murray for as much time as she may require, and then we'll have the vote.
Mr. President, if I could ask for 5 minutes following the senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, Senator from Utah has given an excellent speech about why it'd be a good idea to have a Republican president of the United States, but we don't have one. So the reason we're voting today is that we need an education secretary, a United States education secretary, confirmed by and accountable to the United States Senate, so that the law to fix No Child Left Behind will be implemented the way Congress wrote it. In December, at the ceremony where President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act, the new law to fix No Child Left Behind, I urged the President to send to the Senate a nominee to be the Education Secretary to replace Arne Duncan. Without that, we would have gone a whole year without a leader of that department confirmed by and accountable to the United States Senate. I made that recommendation to the President because this is such an important year for our 100,000 public schools and the 50 million students who are in those schools. We need an education secretary who is confirmed, who is accountable to Congress, while we're implementing a law that may govern elementary and secondary education for some time. I want to be sure that we're working together to implement the law the way that Congress wrote it. That law was passed with broad bipartisan support. It passed the United States Senate by a vote of 85 to 12. It passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 359 to 64. We achieved this result because, as Newsweek said, No Child Left Behind was a law that everybody wanted fixed, and fixing it was long overdue. Governors, teachers, superintendents, parents, Republicans, Democrats, students all wanted No Child Left Behind fixed. Not only was there a consensus about the need to fix the law, there was a consensus about how to fix it, and the consensus was this: continue the important measures of academic progress of students, disaggregate the results of those tests, report them so everyone can know how schools and teachers and children are doing, but then restore to states, school districts, and classroom teachers and parents the responsibility for deciding what to do about those tests and about improving student achievement. This new law is a dramatic change in direction for federal education policy. In short, it reverses the trend toward what had become a national school board and restores to those closest to children the responsibility for their well-being and academic success. The Wall Street Journal called the new Every Student Succeeds Act the, quote, largest devolution of federal control of schools from Washington back to the states in a quarter of a century. The largest devolution of federal control of schools from Washington back to the states in a quarter of a century. Now, I suppose you could say it didn't go far enough, but that'd be like standing in Nashville, waiting 7 years, hitchhiking a ride to New York City. Somebody offers you a ride to Philadelphia, and you say, I think I'll wait another 7 years. I think I'd take the ride and then see if I could get another ride on to New York City, and that's what 85 United States senators thought when they looked at this. The nation's governors, there's no group more interested in restoring responsibility to states than the nation's governors. They gave our new law the governor's first full endorsement of any piece of legislation since their endorsement of welfare reform 20 years ago in the United States Congress. I believe the new law can inaugurate a new era of innovation in student achievement by putting the responsibility for children back in the hands of those closest to them, the parents, classroom teachers, principals, school boards, and states. The Senate Education Committee, which I chair, and the senator from Washington is the senior Democrat, will hold at least 6 hearings to oversee implementation of the new law. All those hearings will be bipartisan, as our hearings almost always are. We've already held the first one on February 24, with representatives of many of the groups that worked together to pass the law, and now they're working together to implement the law. They formed a coalition already made up of the National Governors Association, the School Superintendents, the National Education Association, the American Federation of Teachers, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Association of State Boards of Education, the National School Boards Association, elementary school principals, secondary school principals, National Teachers Association, with the support of the chief state school officers. And they sent Dr. King a letter saying, quote, "Although our organizations don't always agree, we're unified in our belief that ESSA is an historic opportunity to make a world-class 21st century education system. And we're dedicated to working together at the national level to facilitate partnership among our members and states and districts to guarantee the success of the new law." And they all go on to say, the new law replaces a top-down accountability and testing regime with an inclusive system based on collaborative state and local innovation. For this vision to become a reality, we must work together to closely honor congressional intent. ESSA is clear. Education decision-making now rests with the states and school districts, and the federal role is to support and inform those decisions. Now, you may say something different, but you're disagreeing with the governors, the superintendents, the NEA, the AFT, the state legislators, the state boards of education, the national school boards, the elementary school principals, and the National Teachers Association. Our first oversight hearing with Dr. King will be April 12th. Some have objected to this nomination on the grounds that Dr. King was supportive of Common Core when he was Education Commissioner in New York State. I want those who are worried about that to know that this new law has ended what had become, in effect, a federal Common Core mandate. More than that, it explicitly prohibits Washington, D.C. from mandating or even incentivizing Common Core or any other specific academic standards. That's in the law. It is entirely up to states, local school boards, and classroom teachers. Here is what Senator Roberts of Kansas, who wrote this part of the law, asked Dr. King at our hearing on February 25th. Senator Roberts, I know that we have differences on Common Core. I don't want to get into that. But it is part of the existing legislation in law, and I want to be absolutely clear. This is Senator Roberts. The language says, no officer or an employee of the federal government, including the secretary, shall attempt to influence, condition, incentivize, or coerce state adoption of the Common Core state standards or any other academic standards common to a significant number of states or assessments tied to such standards. Senator Roberts continued, I know that we again have differences, Dr. King, but nevertheless, will you give us your commitment that you will respect the intent as well as the explicit binding letter of that prohibition? Dr. King said, absolutely. That's why we needed a confirmation hearing, Mr. President. That's why we need to have a confirmed Secretary of Education. In my questions to Dr. King, I said this about my exchanges earlier at another hearing with Dr. Tony Evers, the Wisconsin State Superintendent of Public Instruction, who is president of all the state superintendents of public instruction. I said to Dr. Evers, do you read the new law to say that if Wisconsin wants to have Common Core, which it does, I believe, that it may, if it does not want to have Common Core, that it may not, that if it wants part of Common Core or more than Common Core, that it can do that? It simply has to have challenging academic standards that are related to the entrance requirements for the public institutions of higher education in your state. The superintendent of public instruction said he agreed with that. In other words, Mr. President, to be blunt, it doesn't really make much difference what Dr. King thinks of Common Core. Under the law, he doesn't have anything to do with it. He doesn't have anything to do with whether a state adopts it or whether a state chooses not to adopt it. The new law also ended the practice of granting conditional waivers through which the United States Department of Education has become, in effect, a national school board for more than 80,000 schools in 42 states. Governors have been forced to go to Washington to play Mother May I in order to put a plan in to evaluate teachers or help a low-performing school, for example. That era is over. It ends the highly qualified teacher definition. It ends the teacher evaluation mandate. It ends the federal school turnaround models, federal test-based accountability. It ends adequate yearly progress. Those decisions, after all the reports are made about how schools and teachers and children are doing. Those decisions are made by those closest to the children. The new law moves decisions about whether schools and teachers and students are succeeding or failing from Washington, D.C. and back to states and communities where those decisions belong. Now, Mr. President, please permit me in conclusion a personal note. Today, this day, is actually 25 years to the day since I was confirmed as the United States Education Secretary. The senator from Indiana, I believe, was on the Education Committee at that time. But there's this difference. Under a democratically controlled Senate, my nomination took 87 days from the day it was announced, 51 days from when the nomination was formally submitted to the Senate. Under a Republican-controlled Senate, Dr. King's nomination has taken 32 days. His nomination was announced and formally submitted on February 11. So let me conclude the way I started. The reason we're voting today is that we need an education secretary confirmed by and accountable to the United States Senate so that the law that 85 of us voted for to fix No Child Left Behind is implemented the way we wrote it. This vote is not about whether one of us would have chosen Dr. King to be the education secretary. Republicans won't have the privilege of picking an education secretary until we elect a president of the United States. What we need is an education secretary confirmed by and accountable to the United States Senate so that the law to fix No Child Left Behind will be implemented the way we wrote it. I urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I conclude my remarks, but I want to do so with thanks to the senator from Washington, Senator Murray, who played such a crucial role in passing the law fixing No Child Left Behind.